like he is the patron saint of Russia.
Okay, so
And so what happened is, historically, there was a monk back in the early, 400s, that heard that St. Andrew, the disciple of Jesus, was going to be disinterred and, affected. So he grabbed the bones, the relics of the saint, and got on a ship, and supposedly he ended up going until he got shipwrecked on an island, or what he called it, turned out to be in Scotland. And so historically, the town of St. Andrews, where the big college is and where all the big golfing started, is where he landed. And so historically, from 1,500 years ago, Andrew was the patron saint of Scotland. And so a lot of people in different groups, if you can remember, you and I were a Robert or a Bill or a Joe or whoever. That's all they needed to distinguish people. But as middle or last names became important to say, I'm from somewhere else, what happened is the Andersons were people who said, well, I'm a follower of Andrew, which means sort of like I'm a religious person or a churchgoer. And so Anderson was the natural development of the name that said, I'm an Anderson, I follow, our patron saint of Scotland. And there's MacAndrew, which means the Mac part means son of, and the Gill Andrews is the Gaelic version, which is the normal indigenous people's speech, as opposed to sort of the Germanic English that we speak now. And so all those names are variations of the Anderson name. But Anderson implies that you're just a good, nice, church-going kind of guy. And so what's happened is... It is, but what's happened is, you can tell that it's a very common name because everybody sort of said that. So we're not distinguished by a Highland group or a Lowland group, where we're all over. We're on the islands, we're Lowland Scots, we're Highland Scots, we're all over. There are four major lines in the Anderson names, because back in the 14 or 1500s AD, there was a chieftain of Anderson. And in fact, back up, the Declaration of Arbroath is in 1320, where we said to the Pope, we were saying this to the Pope of the Catholic world, because he was like the leader of everything. We said we have the right to independence, we have the right to say who we are, who we elect, how we govern ourselves. Why these British keep constantly trying to attack us and take us over? And so they declared their independence. It's called the Declaration of Arbroath in 1320. There's an Anderson who signed that, just like a Declaration of Independence. There's a large roll-up document that has all these seals hung to it. It looks real thready, and they call it the Ragman Roll. And it's a document that exists that says these people signed off, just like our Declaration of Independence of the United States. They signed off and said, we agree with this. We want to be an independent free Scotland. And there's an Anderson who signed that. So it clearly shows we're an Anderson of that ilk in terms of we had people, we had definition and identification, we're a clan. Well, but unfortunately, from the 1500s, all that's died out. But again, backing up, there's four major lines of Andersons. One is Candacray, one is Waterton, one is Dalheaton, but there's a few others that all claim, like, well, I should be the clan leader for St. Andrews. Well, you can imagine, they do what they call the Lord Lion Court of Scotland, who decides who has arms, who has this legitimacy of name or whatever. What they've capitulated to say is that, well, you four guys get together and decide who among you should be the chief. You can imagine where that's going, because they all want to be.
So there's a master document where all listed.
Yeah, exactly. And it goes back, like I said, back 700 years or more. We have a lot of connection with Clan Chatham, Clan Ross, a few others. And so some of them think that we should be a sept to them, we should be a sub-clan under them. But that legitimacy is, we were a clan in our own right, so we therefore have the right to have our own clan organization. In other words, we're not sub-part of anybody. We're not a sept or a sub-clan to a larger clan.
Now this is through intermarriage, maybe?
Yeah, there's always a lot of intermarriage for various reasons of convenience or for warfare or settling claims or whatever. Somebody would marry somebody else. Yeah. Somebody would marry somebody else. And so that's a lot of where our connections come from. And it's in that letter, you'll take a look at it, you can see some of the information about that. But again, right now there is no identified chieftain of Clan Anderson. Here we are in 2014. But again, there's 4 lines. They represent the old bedrock historic Anderson name in Scotland. And unfortunately, they've said, well, you 4 decide. Well, they're not going to decide because they all want to be. Nobody's going to kind of party with each other. But again, what we've done in North America is, because we're not even associated with the Scottish clan, we've identified Hope Beer Anderson, which is one of the Andersons of that 4 group. We just said, you can be our leader, you can be our commander, you can be our chief. And so we've done that for 25 years. So we have the clan, which come from the Hope Beer Anderson. This as well.
Yeah, but we are Scottish.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And he actually lives just north of Carlisle, which is in the lowlands. He's in the borders region of Scotland. But his family's from that area. The Candy-Cray Andersons from a different area. The Waterton Andersons were different. So there were enclaves, as you can imagine, where the Andersons were, that were sort of concentrated for who it was that represented the Anderson clan. But again, going back to the historic naming of use of last names, a lot of people just said, well, I identify with St. Andrews, so therefore I'm an Andrews son, or MacAndrew, or Gillandrews, or MacAlandrews. So the name's everywhere in Scotland.
Oh, okay.
But very common. But again, it's been around from the early days of the Wars of Independence in Scotland. They've done a lot of work there.
Well, you say there's borders. I mean, it's just different regions of Scotland.
Well, what I'm saying is the typical border is the border between England and Scotland. That 20 or 30 mile zone that's sort of like the buffer zone in any big divided country and the same landmass. They've said all that the border region. And that's where our Hope Beer Anderson, who we've chosen to represent us as the chieftain of Clan Anderson, North America, that's where he lives. That's where his sort of family estate is. And the others are different places.
Now this reaches way back in history.
Absolutely, yeah. Just,
well, you said like
hundreds of years.
So.
Well, yeah, it goes back quite a ways. And like I say, some of the Andersons, like the Candy-Cray, they have a document, a book that we've actually held for a while. It goes back to hundreds of years, that they document that lineage all the way back into the 17th century.
I might even be able to trace my ancestry back into Scotland and all that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know they got that program on Channel 30, where they research all the celebrities and all.
Right.
I like to get, a good history background.
Exactly.
What's hard German too.
What's hard to do is to jump back from America to the old Europe. It's just a matter of how good the records are. In the Southeast that went through the Civil War, a lot of records were burned, so it's very hard to follow back beyond the Civil War. But if you can get back to a lineage here in the States, hopefully you'll get back to somebody who came from Scotland to America. And that's when you can really kind of hit the mother lode, because we've been over to England and Scotland and researched, and it's the mother lode in terms of organization and detail. You can go back either 200 years within a single day of research, just because everything's so boom organized. This is one of them. So that's the hope, is you can kind of get through all the fragmented records of America, but if you can get back to the Scottish or Scotch-Irish side of things, you can go back easily 100 years very quickly because it's so well organized. So it's a big benefit. But we're like I say, we're all typically Scottish. From my background, our history, if you're a WASP, you're probably as Celtic somehow.
Yeah, you reach back.
Exactly, whether you're Germanic or whatever. But I have an English mother, a lot of English ancestry, and I have some Scottish on my grandmother, my paternal grandmother's side. My wife is bona fide Scottish because her grandfather came from Scotland in 1912, so she's right there, right off the boat, so to speak. So again, all of us have different levels of connection, but if we've got the name and sort of some information, we can start to develop that records research and going back and forth and finding stuff. And it's ironic, but the Church of Latter-day Saints have a lot of records by virtue of the fact that their mission in life, one of their missions in life, is to baptize everybody in the name of Jesus Christ. And so they've just collected records and just copied and copied and copied all this information. So you can go to the National